So, Chris, whenever you want to, you can go ahead and start.
Okay, so this talk's called Friends Don't Let Friends Do IaaS, which weirdly is an interesting name for a talk about PowerShell DSC and IaaS. So we do a lot of work with cloud adoption and moving people to the cloud, and one of the jokes we always say is that friends don't let friends do IaaS because you don't really see the benefits of the cloud by just lift and shifting. So we try and push people to PaaS, and this is the joke name we came up with for a while ago. So I'm Chris Gardner. I'm a DevOps and ALM consultant at Black Marble, who were a software development house in the UK. I've been doing PowerShell for about 4+ years now, actually. I spent the last year and a bit automating software build, releases, all that sort of stuff, and writing DSC, and all of the things that's involved with that. I contribute to a variety of DSC resources. I have one of my own, well, 1.5 of my own at the moment, because I also manage someone else's that they've kind of left to the wayside. I'm on Slack, the UK PowerShell User Group 1 and the main PowerShell group. If you're not on there, definitely join up with the PowerShell Slack. It's a very useful place to get your questions answered. And that's my GitHub link, which has this presentation plus a variety of other things on it. So we'll look at what is DSC, how it works a bit briefly, why we use it, how you can use it in Azure, and a selection of demos. So DSC is Desired State Configuration. It's a configuration management framework built on PowerShell, similar to Chef, Puppet, Ansible, all those ones. You use resources to configure various parts of a system, and they can be Windows features, services, SQL Server, SharePoint, pretty much anything these days with the amount of resources that are out there. And at the moment, configurations are just PowerShell scripts. That looks like that's going to change with the new the changes to DSC core, DSC version 2, whatever they're deciding to call it, which is coming at some point in the future with a big rewrite of a lot of the underlying infrastructure. I will have to update this at some point for more details around that when we find out more, which will probably be at the summit in a few weeks' time. So DSC works quite simply. You have your configuration PS1 file. You run it, pass it any sort of parameters you need to do, and you get a configuration MOF file at the end of that. So a MOF file is a management operation framework, and it's a industry standardized text file format that Microsoft have adopted for this. You drop that onto your target node or nodes, tell DSC to do its thing, and it will apply the configuration, whatever that configuration may be. So a configuration is a special keyword. It's kind of like function, like pest does various describe and context and such. And very much like a function, you can pass it any sort of parameters you want to pass it. Things that are likely to change between various servers that you're running against. Credentials are the big one that you end up passing in, or you can pass in site name, as I've got an example there. So within a configuration, you can have one or more nodes, which are your end systems, whether they're individual servers or multiple servers or whatever. It can be an array, it can be just local host, it could be a variety of things, and you can have multiple node blocks within a single configuration. It gets a little bit more difficult to manage like that, but if that's how granular you want to be with how you can configure each node, then that can work quite well. And for each node you've got in a configuration, you will generate a separate MOF file for it. So resources are the things that actually do the work of configuring your server. They work quite simply. They have a get method, which will find out what the current state of the system of that piece of the system is. They have a test method, which will compare the current state to what your desired state, what you want it to be, and then they will have a set method, which will do whatever is necessary to change the state. The important thing to note is that when you apply a configuration, it will run a test first. If that fails, because the system's not in the state you want it, it'll run set, and then it will then run test again to make sure it's actually applied the changes. If the second test attempt fails, DSC will throw you an error saying your set method's failed, go and have a look into it and figure out what's gone wrong. Even if the set method itself hasn't thrown any exceptions or anything like that. So within DSC, there is the PS desired state configuration module, which comes out of the box. It's got Windows feature, groups, services, files, and a few other things in there. Just the general little things that you might want to do and don't want anyone else, there's nothing particularly special about them. But you can also import DSC resources similar to modules, and you have to do that for any ones that aren't PS desired state configuration. So X-Web administration, if you want to do things with SQL Server or any of the other more advanced things you'd want to configure on a server, you have to use import DSC resource. So resources are a configuration similar to ARM templates or CloudFormation or Terraform or anything like that, where you can set dependencies to sequence things correctly. So in this case, we're going to turn ourselves into a web server and then disable the default website because we're deploying our own version or something. But we can't disable the default website until we're actually a web server. So we set the depends on to be Windows feature web server. If you don't set the dependencies, then generally the eventual MOF file will be in the order they're specified in the PS1 file. That doesn't always happen, but it's a general rule of thumb that it does. I much prefer to have the dependencies specified and explicit there, because then someone else coming along knows exactly which order things are going to happen in, and so that you know later on which order things are going to happen in. And it helps you document how your systems are configured and which order they should be configured, since that's generally the idea of infrastructure as code, is that it's, you don't have to manually click buttons and things. So then we have configuration data, which lets us separate our specific details about things, about where things should go, from what should go on them. So in the case of web servers, we might have 10 web servers, and the difference is what websites are deployed to them. So rather than having 10 different nodes, you can have one and pass in your configuration data saying, grab me the website name, and just turn that into as one of the websites we deploy. So it's quite useful for separating that data out. The configuration data is just a PSD1 file. There are a variety of projects out there to make it a bit more manageable, because managing a configuration data file with 200 nodes in is going to be more than a little bit challenging. So there's one called Datum, which is quite an interesting project by Gail Colas, who's a PowerShell MVP, and there's a few other projects to do with pulling things out of config systems and databases and various other sources, because all it needs to do at the end of the day is just be like a hash table. So it's quite a useful format. Something useful as well is that you must have an all nodes section, which has all of your various nodes in it, and then you can have any number of non-node data sections, and they don't have to be called non-node data. Lots of people do. It's quite a useful thing for storing stuff that's going to be across multiple nodes, environments, like general environment settings, that sort of thing. So let's have a look at generating a MOF file. Where's my data? There we go. Is that? Can people see that? Let's just see actually. So this is a nice and simple MOF configuration, just turning my server into a web server. So if I do get window feature web server, we can see this server is not currently a web server. So I can run this configuration, and similar to functions and other things, all it does is create an instance of it in memory, but it hasn't done anything with that yet. So I have to do web server to call this, and I can pass in various things. So the big ones you generally use would be DSC run as credential, which will let the configuration as a whole run as a different user, because by default it runs as system, which is great for a lot of things because it has permissions to do lots of stuff. But as soon as you want to talk to network drives or anything outside of the box or has to run on as a specific user, you generally have to drop down to adding DSC run as credential. You can specify this on individual resources as well, which is very useful for particularly things like SharePoint, which has to run as a specific user account when you're configuring it, which is the farm admin or SQL or anything that talks to other networks as well. Output path will let you specify where the MOF file goes, and configuration data will be the configuration data file. It can either be the file itself or the path to the file, or just the hash table that you've loaded into memory. Either works. So I've got no parameters to pass this, so I'll just run web server. It will warn me that I'm loading PS desired state configuration without explicitly importing it. Not a huge issue, but sometimes people want to actually manually import it so it's obvious that it's being used. So if I look in, it's not even in documents. So now I have a localhost.mof file, which if I open up with Notepad, you can see it's quite a simple file. A little bit of blurb at the top about who generated it and where. Any resources go in the middle with all of those lovely semicolons. And some information at the bottom about, again, where it was generated and some extra information about dates and things. For the most part, you generally don't need to look in these files, but you can end up with issues where you want to check what values have actually been set, particularly if things aren't applying and it thinks there's null values there. The other thing to note is that once this is applied to a machine, it's encrypted at rest, and you can also encrypt credentials within it by using a certificate, but the certificate has to be on the node you're applying the configuration to. So you get effectively two levels of encryption on those credentials, of encrypted by a certificate, and then the MOF itself is encrypted. So if we go back to here, what we can do is start DSC configuration. You can tell it to wait, so the console will sit there while it applies the configuration. Force is used if there's already a configuration being applied. It will stop that and start this one. Path is the path to where the MOF file is, so you just point it at the folder and it will figure out, based on the various MOF files that are in there, defaulting to localhost or whatever the machine's called as the name of the MOF file. Computer name, because then you can apply it across the network using credentials as applied sim sessions and various other things. And we want some verbose. I've never actually tried what if with one of these, so I'm not sure what. I'd hope that does what you'd imagine what if would do, and that it won't actually apply, it'll just tell you what it would apply, or if it'll try and pass what if into the resources. I'm not sure on that, so I'll have to play around with that. So, if I move this around a bit so I can actually click buttons. Zoom out a bit. So here we can see it's applying the configuration. So it's first running the test for our Windows feature, discovering that the Windows feature isn't there. So it's applying set, and you can see it's starting the installation of our Windows feature. Give it a few seconds because it isn't too big of a feature to install. I see that it hangs on me. Great. So I would generally advise running with the dash verbose when you're running this manually, because then you can see the logging and you can see where each step is going, and hopefully most of the resources you'll run will give quite good verbose output, and it's a bit easier to see the error message rather than trying to dig through the event log, because all of this is logged to the desired state configuration event view log under applications and settings, Windows. There we go. So now it says it's successfully installed the feature web server. So if we run our get Windows feature, we can see we're now a web server. And so that's quite a simple MOF file, and probably it's unlikely you will ever have anything that simple in production or even in test environments, other than for doing things like this to make sure DSC is doing what you expect it to do. But it's an example. So why do we use DSC? The configs are PowerShell files, which is great, nice and simple for people to read, but we can also store them in source control, so we can track the changes of our environments over time. So we're not trying to figure out who installed what on that day, why is this server suddenly not working, what's changed, which GPOs have changed, when did they change. So it's, you get that extra level of control over what's deployed and when, and you can track who did it. Resources are PowerShell modules, normal ones, class-based ones, either works. In the future, you'll also be able to write Python and, I believe, C resources, so that they'll be cross-platform compatible. Custom resources are very easy to write, as long as you can write a get method to figure out what sort of state the thing's in at the moment. As long as you can write a test method to figure out if it's actually in that state and compare it to what you want it to be, and then write a set method, which is generally the easiest one, then you can write a DSC config. There's tons of these on the gallery, and there's still quite a few. Well, there are still some on GitHub that haven't been published to the gallery. If you find any of those, just bother the repo owner and tell them, do you mind publishing this to the gallery so more people can use it and in better ways. But if you ever find problems with them, you can log issues on GitHub and then either fix it yourself or someone else might come along and fix it for you. And there's tons and tons of documentation out there. There's tons of blogs out there. There's some little differences between DSC that came with PowerShell version 4 and DSC that came with PowerShell version 5, mostly with regards to the pull server. but that's not that's the only major difference. And if you're running PowerShell 5 instead of 5.1, I definitely recommend upgrading because there were some bugs with how it worked in 5 compared to 5.1. So within Azure, you have extensions that get applied to VMs, which can be custom scripts, things like joining domains, and a bunch of other stuff. DSC is one of them. You can apply it via ARM templates, PowerShell, the Azure CLI, or through the portal. The portal is the least easy way to do it because you can't specify things like credentials correctly. You can't pass in config data as easily. My preferred method is ARM templates because I want to deploy a selection of VMs and configure them all at the same time and sequence the configuration correctly. So my DCs spin up first and then turn themselves into DCs, and then everything else spins up and joins it. And you get that extra level of dependency management to control how your environment deploys. PowerShell and Azure CLI work pretty easily, as you'd imagine they would. And you have two configuration options for how you deploy your configs onto them. Push is you have a zip file with all of your configs in and all of the resources they need. And that zip file has to be somewhere that Azure can talk to, which can be GitHub or some other public source, or it can be an Azure storage account, and you can pass it the URI to that and an access token. You can also use pull mode using either an on-prem pull server or Azure Automation. Azure Automation is free for all Azure VMs using a certain version of the extension, but it automatically upgrades, so that's not a problem. And it's very cheap for on-prem VM nodes as well now. There was a change a few months ago saying that it now costs only for as long as however many times it checks in with the pull server. So previously it was a cost of $6 per node per month. Now it's generally going to be a fraction of that because you don't need to check in every 15 minutes. You can check in once a day, once a week, however often you feel. Some nodes should check in, and the maximum they will ever charge you is $6 per month per node, which is quite a reasonable price, to be honest, compared to similar ones of Chef and Puppet and the other ones. So push config, so everything has to be in a single zip file, and the zip file basically has to be pretty flat structure. All of your resources is just the folders, and then a bunch of PS1 files, or one PS1, whichever way you want to do it. It's very useful for testing the configs or doing test environments where you just want to throw environments out and not particularly care too much about them. And you know at some point you're going to tear them down and spin up some more ones. When you redeploy an ARM template, ideally it should fix any configuration drift, similar to how DSC would do. Except that doesn't quite work with push config because it already has the zip file on the machine and the extension installed, so it will just rerun that zip file. If you want to rerun the DSC config, you have to either remove the extension or kill the VM. Depending on which one's faster and how many VMs you're deploying, will just make you decide which way you're doing that. That's got me out quite a few times because I keep forgetting I need to remove the zip file. I'm just like, just redeploy the environment on top of itself, and it doesn't make a difference to me, which is quite annoying. Pull configuration is nice and simple. Well, a bit more simple. You compile the MOF file and drop them onto a pull server. All the resources are dropped onto the pull server, and then you register the node saying your pull server's over there, here's your access key, and the configuration you want to use is whatever it's called, and sort yourself out. And then the server will occasionally check in with the pull server and say, here's the config I've got, is there a newer version? And it will compare checksums and say, oh, yep, there's a new one, here you go. If not, it'll just go, right, off you go, come back when you're ready to ask again. There can be a bit of a delay because of that, but it's usually not big enough of an issue. If the nodes that you want to keep up to date regularly and change regularly, you just set to check in every half hour, every hour, whatever you want to do. For things that you know don't change often, like your domain controllers, just say check in once a day, once a week, off you go. As I say, Azure Automation can be used as a pull server, and it does a lot of reporting into OMS and some of the other tools. And I believe you can pull all of the reporting out into whatever other reporting tools you want, ELK, Greylog, all of those other ones that people keep using. So Azure Automation, which browser should I be in? So here's one I prepared earlier. So you have configurations stored here, nice and simple. In each of these, you can dig into it to find out when it was last compiled, what configurations are available on the server. So you have the domain controller.dc and domain controller.dc.meta. Meta configurations are configurations to tell the local configuration manager how it should be configured, if that makes sense. So things like how often it should check in with pull servers, what certificates it should use for its credential encryption, whether it should apply, which application mode it should have. So things like, should it be on monitor, should it be on apply, should it be apply on apply and autocorrect, and that sort of thing. When you look at each of these, you can look into what happened in that compilation job. So you can see what inputs it was given. I can see I told it what the configuration data was, what credential to use, and what prefix to use. And if you've got any errors or warnings, they'll show up here as well. In this case, this is just you're using PS desired state configuration without explicitly importing it. What else do we have? So I've got 3 configurations here, one for domain controller SQL web server. You also store your modules in here. By default, there's a whole bunch of the Azure ones, and you have to push the various versions of the modules that you require into here. There's two main different ways to do that through the portal. You can click Add Module and upload a zip file, or you can click Browse Gallery, which will take you to the PowerShell gallery, and then you can push them into here. Both of those take a long time to do if you have 20, 30, 40 resources to push in here. So I have a VST extension that I'll show off soon that will do this for you, and there's a bunch of PowerShell command lists you can use to just pass things into here. You do have to push them into a storage account so that Azure can then pull them out of that, but that's a reasonably easy step to do. Credentials with Azure Automation are stored within the Azure Automation, and all you do is tell it the name of the credential, and then it figures out, it basically pulls them out of Key Vault and does its thing with them. So you don't need to worry about handling credentials beyond adding them through the portal or through some PowerShell. Once you have compiled your nodes, or compiled your configurations, you have your DSC node configurations. Again, you can click into each of these, and I used to be able to click into each of these. It's interesting. Once again, they changed the portal without telling anyone. You did used to be able to click into these and view the actual resulting MOF file, but apparently not anymore. But you can see here I've got 2 for each node, and one's a meta file, one's not. So in my actual nodes, I have something I deployed earlier. So this is a DC that's deploying. I've told it exactly which configuration it should be using as part of my template, and we should get some nice output from this. I have no results. Okay. I'll look at that in a second. So within here, you can see the reports of how often it's checked in and the status of each of those check-ins. And if any of them have failed, you can look into the error logs for why it's failed. One extremely useful tool when deploying stuff to Azure is the resources.azure.com site, which will let you see the running state of VMs that you've deployed. So if I click on, you can navigate all the way down to the resource group, compute resource, VMs, and then instance view, which will show you basically the state of all of the individual things. So in this case, I can see my initial extension succeeded, and it will show you all of the verbose output and things that have applied. There's nothing there. Interesting. So if I click refresh, I get nothing. Refresh that. So I've just deployed this through dev test lab, so I should be able to have a look in here. It's definitely not being created. Should be interesting. Okay, so it thinks it's actually basically done. Anyway, yes. So yeah, you've got a lot of information you can get out of each of these things within Azure Automation, and you can add VMs manually through here to say yes, connect to me, and all it will do is the same sort of steps as I'm doing through my template of applying the DSC extension, saying your pull server's over there, join onto it, use this configuration. So if I choose this one, can I move this window? Yes. So I can click connect. I'll choose my web server config. Check in every half an hour is fine. Reboot if needed. So now that will deploy my configuration. Well, it will deploy a configuration to the VM saying, talk to Azure Automation, do your thing, pull down the config. So if I refresh this, it will show up soon. And as it hooks in OMS, so if I click on log search, I should be prompted with a bunch of extra logging information. And I get nothing. Interesting. That's probably because I've just spun up the VM 20 minutes ago or so. So that's the majority of the Azure Automation side. So if we look at how we actually get these configs into Azure Automation, I've got a build pipeline which runs a few simple things. It validates my PowerShell to make sure it's actually valid syntax. I haven't done stupid things like miss out braces or brackets or anything else. It does some static code analysis using SonarQube to make sure I haven't done anything really stupid, like the usual things Script Analyzer figures out. I then test it against my coding guidelines that I've set up. Things like where braces have to be if they're on new lines or not, that there's no backticks at the end of lines, or a variety of other things that, as a company, we've decided these are the rules people will stick to when writing PowerShell. I sign the files because I want to make sure they're signed by my certificate, and then I publish them as a VSTS artifact, which means either I can pull them down and manually do things with them, or my release pipeline can pick them up. And this is set to run automatically as soon as the build succeeds. Pardon me. Dump this stuff into Azure. So the way this step works is it will look on a specific subscription, find the relevant Azure Automation account, and then go through all of the PS1 files in this folder that is specified, find every single one of them that's a DSC configuration, pull out all of the import DSC resource lines, and figure out what modules I actually want and what versions of those modules. It'll download all of those and push them into Azure Automation, and push all of the PS1 files into Azure Automation. I've then got another step that will compile all of those for me. I can pass in a config file which says, basically, for this configuration, give it these parameters that I have. And it'll do all of that configuration for me, pulling any relevant credentials out of Key Vault if I need them, or pass in configuration data files. And it'll accept PSD1 or JSON. There's a little bug with the JSON thing at the moment, but that's because I was working on it an hour ago and haven't fixed that yet. And this will all run in the background, so I can just go push a new config to my Git repo, and then within 20 minutes, half an hour, I've got a brand new version sitting in automation for my nodes to start pulling down. And if we have a look in here, my web server's appeared. I can have a look and see what's happening. It's doing its initial config. I can see it's in progress, when it started, how long it's been running for, and any other information that comes out of it. So we can check back on that bit later on. So, any questions?
Is there anything specific you do for logging and viewing those logs as you go? I noticed that the output of the logs look like JSON. How do you consume those?
Usually manually in a browser. For the most part, I generally don't care about the logs, unless there are problems. If there's problems, my deployments will generally fail and I'll go looking, or something like OMS will pick it up and tell me there's been a problem with DSC, and I'll go and dig into it and figure out why or how.
Sure. So you're not looking, I guess there's no data that you're collecting at this point around like changes over time. Are you doing immutable deployments in that case, or what does that look like for you?
So at the moment, we're primarily using this for our test environments. So we just throw it out an environment, make sure it configures itself correctly, and then give it, pass it off to the test team or the devs to wreck it however they want to.
That makes sense.
Yeah. So for most of our tracking configuration changes and stuff, we're just looking source control. Is if there's been a problem, or if we want to know what's changed between one day and a week later, we just look at that history. DSC does keep the current MOF file and the previous MOF file if you wanted to compare those. Obviously, if you've applied multiple MOF files, that's not quite going to work for you, but there's that. It does keep those in somewhere in C System 32.
Fair enough.
So are many people using DSC already or playing around with it?
I'm trying to evaluate DSC or Ansible to automate our management of my identity management environment instead of current method of sitting there.
Yeah. So DSC is very much just a framework or a platform. It's really nice. You can use it straight out of the box, but reporting's basically very limited unless using something like Azure Automation. So a lot of the suggestions are, as soon as you start scaling out beyond 20, 30 nodes, you want to be looking at something like Chef or Puppet or Ansible. They all do things with DSC, and it gives you the better experience and the better reporting and all of the other tools that you want out of configuration management.
I was looking at Ansible because I also have Linux servers that I have to.
Yeah. So if you're already using something to manage your Linux servers, you can keep using that to manage your Windows servers as well, and just use DSC for the actual configuration. I know quite a few people who use Chef or Puppet already for their Linux boxes and just go, well, we'll just roll it out on Windows as well.
Oh, the biggest issue is that I find something to set up a Windows server with SQL Server 2016.
Yeah. There's a bunch of templates and
Puppet does do that now.
Yeah, there's various templates and configuration. If you look at some of the Azure Quick Start templates, they've got some DSC in them for configuring things like SQL Server. So you can just grab those zip files and steal the DSC basically. It's all on GitHub.
Yeah, and clarifying point, I think all of the config management tools that use DSC use invoke DSC resource.
Yes, yeah. I believe Chef at least will let you pass it an entire PS1 script and use that as you normally would, as just another resource within Chef, and it'll just apply the whole config script. Whether you want to abstract your DSC to your configurations to another level, so you've got like 2 levels of configurations, is a different matter. I'm not sure I'd want to do that, but it's certainly an option that Chef supports.
That's pretty cool. I didn't realize that.
Yeah.
Hey, Chris. I know there was at least, okay, this was a while ago that I looked at this, but with Azure Automation, there was a way to actually install an agent into your own data center and have the ability for Azure Automation to control local agents rather than just resources at Azure. Just wondering if that's still a play. Oh, look,
Yep. Yep. You can add non-Azure, so it'll install the Azure agent thing on your machines on-prem.
Okay.
There is the cost involved there. It's a fraction of a % per time it checks in. So generally you want to reduce that to as infrequently as possible, once a day, once a week, something like that, because then it's going to cost you a couple of pennies a month per node.
Cool, thank you.
That can also be used to do things like runbooks and jobs as well, and the hybrid worker stuff is all, so you can run your Azure Automation runbooks on-prem through that sort of agent as well.
Can you configure or set up a DSC action or a job basically to just do like a run once configure? So as this comes up, just configure it, but then don't do like actual config management, don't control the drift thereafter?
Yes. So DSC's got a couple of states. You've got apply only, which will literally apply it once and that's it. Or apply it successfully once. It's got apply and monitor, which will apply it once and then track the drift for you. And then you've got apply and autocorrect, which will, every time it runs a consistency check, it will fix any drift of things that it tracks at least. We were jokingly going to use that for some of our Server 2012 boxes, so we'd rip the GUI off them because we don't need it, and then every 15 minutes or whatever it would check and attempt to take the GUI off again if it was on, because we have a few people who like RDPing into servers and putting the GUI on, and we were like, we don't want that. Every 15 minutes it'll just rip the GUI back off again.
That's cool. In theory, so if someone's running a hybrid data center to where they have, items up in Azure, items on-prem, they could potentially be able to build a resource using the same configuration, whether it's on-prem or in the cloud with the same Azure automation platform here.
Yes.
They would just need to bootstrap the agent, something like that.
Yeah, we can definitely do that. So what we've got is we've got a whole bunch of DSC configs for our test environments, which are basically individual nodes. Like we have web servers, we have SQL servers, we've got DCs, and the idea is we can apply that DSC config to an Azure environment or to on-prem environments that we spin up with Hyper-V usually. Do I have it open?
Okay. So basically Azure RM is DSC's management server, their back-end way, or at least it can act in that sense, because DSC by itself doesn't really have that. So
not quite, no. So if I look in here, so we've got a whole bunch of servers that we've basically written configs for, which will do all of the things we want them to do, and then we just pick and choose them as we go for creating new environments. And then we have a flag saying, if you're in Azure, do something slightly differently. So some of the networking we need to do differently, because when we're on-prem, we set static IP addresses on these because we're deploying behind NetNats and on internal networks, and we don't generally have DHCP there. But in Azure, you don't want to do that because the fabric gives you your IP address, and it doesn't really work if you try and give it a different one. Because then we've got a whole bunch of environments up here, which are just combinations of various bits of machines that we might need for deploying things. Like we've got SharePoint environments, which are 4 or 5 different boxes, web servers, SQL servers, all that sort of stuff. And we happily apply those in both Azure and on-prem with the same DSC.
Cool, that makes sense. Thank you. Think we have any other questions left here?
I'm happy to answer non-DSC related PowerShell questions.
I was just going to ask, in your experience, what was kind of like the hardest hurdle for you to get over when you started implementing DSC? What are some of the bear traps that you found maybe you could help other people avoid stepping into?
So the main one that I kept running into myself was the trying to reapply an ARM template in Azure when you've got a zip file and it just doesn't re-download it. If I change the zip file and upload it to storage. Other than that, it's kind of like figuring out where all the log files go to. So you've got the event viewer logs, and just running the config again in a console will generally give you some good feedback. What else have I run into? Not contributing to problems that you find. So if you find an issue, you're like, I really want this fixed, log it on GitHub and then attempt to fix it yourself. And if you can't, well, you've tried, but you can possibly provide some feedback in that issue of, I've tried to do these things, it doesn't work. Great. If it does work, you've just contributed to an open source resource, and that helps you and everybody else. There are monthly updates of all of those of DSC resources. It gets published by Microsoft because they manage quite a few of them. But even the general ones managed by the community are pretty good with getting updates out quickly, accepting pull requests, that sort of thing. And writing custom resources isn't as scary as people think.
Good point. Okay, I'll go ahead, and since nobody else has got any questions, I'm going to go ahead and ask this. So I noticed when you were in your VSTS task list that you had several steps where you defined some pre-flight checks and that sort of thing, but I might have missed it. I didn't I don't remember seeing something after you applied the config that verified from outside of DSC using something like PoshSpec or that. Is that something that you do or that you're looking at doing, or is it something because you're using it in a test environment right now, you just don't care that much?
It's kind of a combination. It's definitely something I want to start doing. Even for our test environments, I really would like to write some pester tests or something just to say, has it actually applied, and is it actually correct? It's mostly a matter of finding the time to do it at the moment. I did see a talk on Test Kitchen, which really made it make sense that I should start doing that as well. That was quite a good talk by Stephen Morawski. That I do need to look at Test Kitchen as well as another platform for testing my configs.
Yeah, at a previous life, I used Test Kitchen and then DSC to configure the box, and then I used PoshSpec afterwards to go ahead and verify the state that it was in. That was pretty useful.
Yeah. Did I see a question there?
We have one question in the chat, just as follow-up. Jeremy asked that you had mentioned 20 nodes is about where DSC, its sweet spot configuring. Is that 20 servers or 20 different configurations that you're applying to a server before it gets too unwieldy?
I'd probably say 20 servers rather than 20 configurations, because that 20 configurations could be hundreds of servers potentially. It's whatever point you find it difficult to start managing and reporting on all those servers. So I know a few people use Invoke DSC, which to do a lot of their stuff, and a lot of people have written lots of custom tooling to do their reporting. There's DSC EA, which is supposed to be quite useful that I keep meaning to look at, which does some more reporting as well. And that's the big problem for lots of people is, sure, I can deploy these configurations to all my machines quite easily. It's just a couple of lines of PowerShell. But it's how do I track that and do and get all of the pretty graphs that let me know when things are right, when things are wrong, what's drifted, that sort of thing. And I imagine 20 nodes is probably about the right sort of number, depending on team sizes and how much time you have available to write various tools.
So given that, would you say kind of in your experience, DSC is good if, let's say more of a consulting shop where you come into the area where you have to spin up this technology or that technology, maybe not managing hundreds of nodes with that, but hey, I need to spin this up and test it and try with this. Okay, I'm done with this project, move on, and then I need to come back to it, but I already have that, so I can just respin that back up versus, again, managing, hundreds of thousands of nodes with DSC and Azure Automation.
Yeah, I would definitely say it's better for smaller shops. When you start getting to bigger numbers, you definitely want either custom tooling or a proper full-blown configuration management tool that you might use to leverage DSC, but you want all of the extra things that things like Chef and Puppet give you over just plain old DSC out of the box. Azure Automation does help a lot with its reporting, but I've never quite got to the point where I've got hundreds of nodes to manage, so I'm not quite sure how unwieldy that is. I believe Microsoft used DSC straight out of the box with a bunch of extra tooling on top, like Azure Automation, and they manage some thousands, tens of thousands, whatever nodes they have. So I haven't had chance to talk to the various Azure teams, especially on that sort of area, so I'm not sure how easily it works for them or what extra custom tooling they've written to support it, but that's the big push. Lots of the DSC guys, and especially people like Jeffrey Snover, says it's a nice starting point, but it requires other things on top of it.
That makes sense. Thank you.
What's your favorite DSC module that's out there on the gallery right now?
Um, I don't know. My least favorite is probably SQL Server DSC because they love their
Strong
breaking
concur.
they love their breaking changes and incrementing their major version numbers very very rapidly. I think we were using version 6 back in July last year, and it's up to version 11 or 12 or something now. I think I probably contributed a little bit to that, but not as much as not enough to warrant that sort of change. Favorite, I don't know. I'd like to say one of the ones I manage, but that's probably not quite right because I don't do enough with those at the moment.
I think that might be all the questions we have. I'm running out of things that I can make up on the spot.
That's all right. So there's my contact information. I'm on Twitter. I have a blog. I'm on GitHub. As I say, I'm on Slack. If anyone ever has any questions, just drop me a line. I'm happy to answer. Anything DSC related, anything PowerShell related, ask me random questions. I'll probably come up with fake answers sometimes.
I do actually have one question that may not help anybody in this room. I assume you're not coming out to the summit in April in North America.
I am.
Oh, you
I'm at-
are?
I am at the summit, and I'm at the PSConf EU the week after as well. So I have 2 weeks solid of PowerShell.
Awesome. Well, I will
Yeah.
see you at the summit then.
Yes, I was there last year as well. That was good. Yeah, I'm looking forward to this year.
We appreciate your time. I know you stayed up pretty unreasonably late to give this presentation for us.
It's not too bad, but it's been good. Thank you very much for having me and changing your agenda last minute.
Well, it's my fault for forgetting that I had booked you, so it's not on you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. We really appreciate you. I know.
No
No worries.
Thank you very much for, yeah. So
Have a great night.
Yes, you too.